I'm Mitch Gallagher, welcome to the Sweetwater Minute. This time out, we're checking out the latest version of Studio One from PreSonus. Let's get started. Today we're checking out Studio One version 4, the latest version of PreSonus' very popular DAW software. Now, I've been using Studio One for a number of years, especially for songwriting and for creating different arrangements. It has so many great features for that. With Studio One version 4, they've really upped the ante. There are a ton of features here for creating music, for creating beats, for working with grooves, and also utility features. There's a lot that's gone into this software. You're going to want to check it out, and I'm going to give you a quick overview right now. Studio One version 4 is great software whether you're creating music, mixing, recording in the studio, even mastering. It can take you from the creation of the idea all the way to the final release of your project. And now with Studio One version 4, we have some new tools that are especially interesting for song creators. We already had the Arrange track and the Scratch pad, which I found to be incredibly useful when I was writing music for my latest project. But now PreSonus has added a new feature in Studio One version 4. It's called Harmonic Editing. Let's check out how this works. With Harmonic Editing, Studio One will look at the material that's inside your tracks, whether that's audio or MIDI. It'll automatically detect chords in there, and you can change those chords, and it'll automatically reharmonize your music. It's incredible. Let's take a look at how it works. Now, we can do all of this with MIDI. We can play chords in from a MIDI keyboard, we can analyze a MIDI track, and we can create our song track that way. But to me, what's really fascinating is the way that we can work with an audio track. So what I've done is laid down just a simple guitar track here. It has a number of different chords, a number of different sections. We're going to let Studio One detect the chords in that, and I'll show you how you can change the arrangement by working with the harmonic structure of the song. So here's our basic track. So we've got a basic idea for a song there. I've got a rhythm guitar part, I've got a drum part playing along an easy drummer. Now let's take a look at what we can do with that guitar part. So let's solo this. We'll rewind here. We've got just our guitar part. The first thing we want to do is, first of all, we'll open up our chord track, which is here at the top. Now, we're going to analyze our track to detect the chords. Here you can see that it's found this is a G7, C7, G7, A6, D6, F6, A minor, and so on. There are a couple little chords in here. My bet is that what's happening there is I made a little bit of noise as I was playing it, left something ringing or something, and so it's pulling that out and looking at it as a chord. We can just delete those out if we want, but it really doesn't matter at this point because they're in silences, so it's not a big deal. But if we rewind this now, we can choose to actually either drag that up to the chord track, or we can tell Studio One to extract to chord track, and we see that our chord chart is right up here. And again, we've got a couple little extra things that we can just delete out of there if we want to clean this up just a little bit. Very easy to do that. Now, the magic starts to happen when we look at this chord track up here. We can tell our track to follow. So we can set this to follow our chords, and there are a number of different modes for doing that. We can turn it off so it doesn't follow the chord track at all. We can choose narrow, which means it's going to look very specifically at the harmony. We can look at particular bass parts. We can make it stick to a particular scale. But parallel is basically going to move everything up and down as we change our chords. Now we can change our chords in a couple of different ways. First of all, we can click in here and open up the chord selector. This allows us to choose either a new chord type. We can add intervals on top of that. So we can work with a lot of different chord sounds, put those into our track, and it will automatically follow along here in our guitar track. So if we rewind, now of course D diminished is a long way from our G7. Let's get back to our G7 and we'll look at what happens when we just try to change the chords into something slightly different. So we'll go back to our G. It's a major chord with a 7. We're back to our G7. So we're right back where we started. Now let's say we want to move this to F7. Rewind. And instead of going to C7 here, maybe we'll go to E7. It does a great job of transposing and maintaining the chord structure as we're playing there based on what's happening inside that chord track. Now, PreSonus does recommend that you figure out your arrangement using this chord track and having the track follow that, and then go back and re-record things once you have those chords solidified and you have the arrangement together. But this is an amazing tool for working on your arrangements. You can even change the tonal color of your chords. So if we're on F7 here, we can open this up and we can make this a F minor with a 7 on top. And when we rewind, this is so powerful for working on song ideas. You want your final chorus to go up by a whole step, you can easily program that in. And again, working with audio here, you can do the same thing with MIDI. You can input your chord changes using a MIDI keyboard. There are lots of different ways you can work with this. It really does a good job of transposing and sounding very natural, but then you can go back at the end and replace it with a final track if you like. We can choose in our project which of our tracks we want to follow the chord track. We can choose a key signature, or in fact, Studio One will automatically detect the key signature for us. So it'll do a lot of things very intelligently to make things sound smooth as you're transposing and trying out different chordal ideas. Another great new feature in Studio One version 4 for music creators is the new drum editor. Let's check out how this works. So I've got a drum track here. We'll open this up. It's a basic easy drummer part. And you can see that we're looking at this in a standard piano roll type of editor. But if we click here on our drum, it becomes a drum editor, which is extremely easy to work with for creating drum patterns. Simply choose our pencil tool, and we can draw in parts wherever we like. Very easy to do. You can change the resolution, we can add different notes. In fact, we can look at all the notes if we like. We can move those notes around, so we can put them in a particular order if it makes more sense. For example, all the hi-hats to be together. We can name them. So we can go through and put a particular name on our notes as well. This makes it very simple and very fast for creating drum tracks. It's an easy way to work, and it's a great addition to Studio One version 4. Now, an additional feature beyond the drum editor is the new pattern feature inside Studio One version 4. We're familiar with step sequencers from other types of electronic music creation where you're basically inputting notes one step at a time and sometimes working on a grid. With patterns, we're doing that inside Studio One, but it's much more intelligent and much more full-featured. Let's take a look. So I've created a track here that's set up inside my pattern editor, which again you can see looks very much like a piano roll. But we can also go in and work with name notes in more of a drum editor type style. If we come back over here, one of the big things about this is that we can have variations. You can have an unlimited number of variations. So we can create a version of this, click on version 2 or variation 2, and it becomes a different. Now we have two different ideas that we're working there, and we can switch in between those on the track and add a lot of variety to our variations as we're playing these back as more of a step sequencer kind of a thing. Patterns also allow us to work with a lot of different MIDI parameters as well, so you can really get in there and take charge of what's happening with each one of the notes. To access those parameters, we click down here. This opens up a window. We can see our velocity. We can open this up and choose other automation parameters as well. So we have a lot of different possibilities there for shaping our pattern. This allows you to go way beyond a standard step sequencer. You can be much more creative, and with all those different variations, you can build up a whole library of different patterns that you can pull into your different songs and your tracks. There have been two major virtual instrument upgrades in Studio One version 4. The first of those is that Impact is now known as Impact XT, and it has a ton of new features. So Impact XT opens up here. The first thing you'll see is that we have 8 banks of 16 pads, so we have a lot more notes to choose from. We now have up to 32 outputs available to us to feed into the mixer, 16 mono and 16 stereo. This gives you a lot more flexibility for panning different sounds, for mixing them together, for adding effects to those as well. So that makes us much more versatile. We have a new stack mode for layering samples on a single pad, and we also have real-time time stretching, and in fact that can sync up to the tempo of your song. This makes it very easy to create songs that are matching right in and syncing with your music. There are 32 choke groups for working with samples, for example cymbals if you want those to cut off. In addition, there are a ton of new features. Everything from reverse sample playback to trigger quantization to sample normalization. Lots and lots you can go in to edit on the samples, on the pads, to set things up exactly the way that you want. In fact, Impact XT is so powerful that you can now use it to create an entire arrangement right within the single plugin. One of the great features is that Impact XT can actually interact with your audio tracks. It's very easy to move audio into Impact XT. All we have to do is go to an audio track, open up the context menu, go to audio, and down here we can see send to new impact. It'll automatically load in our track. In this case, we've got our guitar track now loaded into this instance of Impact XT. It's automatically sliced up our audio, and we can work with that however we like. There are so many more new features in Impact XT, I think you're really going to have a lot of fun exploring this virtual instrument. Our second new instrument is Sample One XT. Sample One, of course, was a very powerful sample playback instrument, but now with Sample One XT, it's become an extremely powerful sampler as well. So we'll open up Sample One XT, we can play this back. I've got a very short envelope on this, which I've programmed here. We can stretch that out. We'll hear more of the note. We've got our waveform display, and now we can do a ton of different work with that audio sample to create new sounds. We've got 3 different envelopes, one for pitch, one for filter, and one for amplitude. But the main new feature that I want you to check out here is the record screen. And this screen, we can automatically record into Sample One XT. We can sample from virtually any input in Studio One. So if we click here in the input, we can scroll down, we can see all our hardware inputs, and down here we've got our instruments, Easy Drummer, Sample One, Impact, and so on. Close that back up. We can also sample outputs, monitors, or our hardware outputs, and in fact we can sample from tracks, so we could even sample from our guitar track if we like. This makes it extremely easy to capture samples if you have just a portion of a track that you want to work with, the output from an instrument that you want to resample and do more work with. You can do that very easily with Sample One XT, or you can bring a signal in from outside using a microphone or a direct input instrument and capture your samples that way. We have a built-in effects section. We have modulation down here, delay, reverb, and effects B. Gives us a gate, an EQ, a distortion, and a pan effect. We can choose to hide the keyboard or our effects, so we can open those up as we like. As with Impact XT, we have real-time time stretching, so again, the samples can actually lock to tempo and be time stretched to match with that tempo. We have easy drag and drop for samples. We can send samples over to Impact XT, or like with Impact XT, we can send directly from an audio track into Sample One XT to work with the samples there. Sample One XT is an extremely powerful sample instrument at this point, allowing you to capture samples, automatically slice them, work with those slices, work with effects, program up your envelopes, all the different effects, all the different sounds, all the things you want to have happen to your samples. You can do all that right within Sample One XT. It's a very powerful instrument. Among the notable new features in Studio One version 4 is Era 2 support. This will allow us to send multiple tracks into Melodyne and work with them simultaneously. We now have AAF support in Studio One version 4 as well. This makes it very easy to import and export your data from Studio One into another DAW or vice versa. It's great if you're going into a studio that maybe uses a different DAW, or if you're working with a friend who has a different DAW and you want to send files back and forth. There's a new sound set available for Impact XT. There are new looks you can apply to Studio One to give it exactly the graphic interface that you want to use, and lots more. 2 other features that I'm really happy about is the new updated look for the mixer. And we also now have Notepad available for individual tracks. So we can input notes on the overall song, or you can input notes on individual tracks. This makes it very easy to document what's happening in your session. I hope you've enjoyed this very quick look at some of the new features in Studio One version 4. Studio One has always been an extremely powerful DAW, and now with these new version 4 features, it's on an entirely new level. I think you're going to have a blast exploring all these different things you can do inside the software. I know I've been having a lot of fun with it. Thanks for joining me for the Sweetwater Minute. I'm Mitch Gallagher.